years after all the elements came down. We're going to talk about some trees and the selection process of what goes where. This was yesterday. It's an Ida Street. We put a Norway maple underneath power lines, and we demand 100% of power. No one takes the power outage lightly, especially if you got a freezer full of meat or whatever. You demand power. So you can't plant a tree under the power lines without something happening, and that is the right of way. It's their right to produce the power for us on a continuous supply, no matter if you plant the wrong tree underneath the lines or not.
Right. I can contest to that right there, and I guess my question to you guys is, would you say that's the right tree in the right place, or is that not the right tree in the right place?
Well, there's 3 trees in a row coming out of Washington Mills. That's the worst looking, because the prune actually killed the limbs, because each limb is energy is supplied by the energy produced by the leaves on that limb. So if you cut off all the production of foods, then the limb itself will die. And then it dies slowly, and then the dead wood falls down, becomes a hazard for the road, for the sidewalk. It's just a bad situation right from the get-go, and there's no reason for it to happen. Site characteristics, and we talked about site briefly, and talked about, you should look at your site before you go plant a tree, and that's exactly right. Because anybody can grow a tree if the soil acidity is pretty close to the acid side of neutral, if it's in the right hardiness zone so that the cold winters aren't going to freeze it, if it isn't affected by insects or disease, and it doesn't get too hot, too cold, or too dry or too wet, and it doesn't live in soluble salts. There are trees that do grow in adverse conditions, which is disturbed soils, and the planting at the fairgrounds that Mike showed you is a disturbed soil. There's nothing right about that soil, it's just complete garbage. Lacks organic matter, high pH. At a high pH, less nutrients are available to the tree because it's all tied up with electrical bonds in the soil. That's chemistry. The heat from blacktop, if we're hot walking down a road that's heated up in the summer and the tree's sitting there right next to it, it's under the same stresses. It wants water, it can't get the water, and so it has problems. Compact soils, water won't go into a compact soil, it runs over the surface. So the trees that are growing in compact soils are under the stress of lack of water. High wind loads evaporate the water out of the tree will suck up 100 gallons a day if it's available, and so to lose it all to evaporation is a problem. And inadequate sunlight is nothing more than the inability to produce the sugars through photosynthesis that the tree needs to survive. So some trees do grow in the shade of other trees, and other trees have to be out in the open so that they get as much sun as possible. It is said that survival of the trees is the winner of the sunlight. If you get the sunlight, you get the energy, you get to grow, you get to produce and store foods and for years to come. If you can't get the light, you're weak, and you can't grow well, and you can't fight the fences of insects and diseases. Every tree, except the ones that are made in laboratories with crosses and the like, have a place of origin. That is a place in nature that they succeeded. So they had, they got the right drainage, the right sunlight, the right pH, the right amount of water. It wasn't too cold or too hot. They survived, they conquered, and they moved on, and they've been moving on for millions of years. Those are the sites that the tree prefers. Those are the sites when you select a tree, you know, or you have an idea of what it expects to be perfect. The valley floors. Organic matter comes down the hills and sits on the valley floors. It's usually wetter than the side hills. On the side hills, the soils are thinner, maybe not have as much organic matter, but they do drain. And then some sites are even drier. If you go west of us, they're drier, higher pHs, less consistent moisture, except this year. And then, like I said, some trees prefer shade of taller trees. Like dogwoods, for instance, are on the edge of the forest where they can get a apple bite. So, the key to successful tree planting is twofold. Identify the site that you're going to be planting the tree into, and then you find a tree that will be able to succeed in that site. Or you have to modify the site in some way that you're getting closer and closer to the conditions that that tree naturally likes. I think it goes without saying that most urban sites have disturbed soil. The soil has either been turned over in agriculture before it became residential or before it became urban, and so it's disturbed that way. The organic processes in soils, the organic material breaks down in something they call the Krebs cycle, but it's a series of 3 or 4 reactions in the soil where organic nitrogen comes down into a form that can then go into the root system. And usually it goes into the root system through a fungus called mycorrhizae, which works in conjunction with and in symbiosis with the root hairs, the fine roots of the tree, and gets these particles into the tree. And the tree says, "Here, have some sugar," and it's a good relationship. So when you put mycorrhizae in the soil, put the fungus in the soil, and they're specific to each trees, it helps build the root system and get organic material and nutrients into the tree. A few products that assist with altering disturbed urban soils are peat moss, composted litter, animal manures, and even coarse semen. Aluminum sulfate makes it more acidic, and lime makes it sweeter, but you have to know what your site is first before you start adjusting the pH. Yes, sir?
I was putting something else on there I got from Magway to make it more acidic. It wasn't aluminum sulfate, it was something else. It was sulfur.
Sulfur does it? Absolutely.
Let's see, which one is, are they both the same price? I mean, the bags of that stuff are, I needed a lot of it and kind of expensive.
Trees are more expensive.
Yeah. Is aluminum sulfate cheaper than sulfur?
Sulfur, I think, is cheaper than aluminum sulfate.
I see. You got to keep doing it forever, though, right?
It's a slow process of changing your soil pH. That's why usually it's done in small areas around the tree instead of in greater areas.
I see. Okay.
Construction site soil. There isn't a piece of organic material in that soil, and we have a lot of trees being planted on construction sites. That site that you saw at the fairgrounds with that big oak tree, right?
Yep.
Mike didn't say how deep that hole was.
How deep was it?
Yeah, how deep was that hole?
About 5 feet.
What was the depth of the root ball?
It was about 4.5, 5. It was close, but it was too deep. We had to keep rocking it back and forth.
It was a foot deep. And when they put that in, it was a quagmire. It was wet. And every time they rocked the tree, the soil just kept on pushing, the tree kept on pushing the soil off to the sides. It never really rose. And it was an ordeal. So always measure your root ball before you, in your hole. And don't overdig. Peat moss. Why do I like peat moss? Several reasons. It's organic. It's inert. It's a plant material, but it's inert. It doesn't break down, so it holds up. It holds 20 times its weight in water. It's a sponge. And it also, being it doesn't break down, it allows, if you mix it in with the soil, for channels of water to go up and down in the soils. So it allows for aeration and water to perk down into the soil and to evaporate out of the soil. And it's cheap. Sand. I love this diagram. I keep on borrowing and keep on putting it in the next presentation. But this is where we want to be, loam or sandy loam in this range here. Clay is all up here. If you have a clay soil, which is what we have here, you're going to have to dump in a lot of sand to sit there and break up that clay such that the water will percolate down. Because if you put a little bit of sand in, you make concrete. So you have to put a lot in to sit there and break up the clay. And a good way to break up the clay is to put sand in and then get some organic matter and peat moss in and then help to work and hold those pore spaces. Trees don't like clay. Roots don't grow in clay. They grow on top of it. So a lot of times you'll see roots on top of the ground. You can guarantee that it's clay soil because they can't get any nutrients out of clay soil. Leaf compost. I don't like to sit there and make the soils a lot richer than the competing soils around it. But depending on where you're starting from, you've got to get some organic matter in your soils so that the roots can then work and get some nutrients to grow. If you make it too rich, they'll never leave the tree pit. But you've got to give it something to break it up. Here's a tree that was pruned probably, 10 years ago, cut down below the lines, and the trees are now suckering back up. Next one down the street. Wires are generally 20 feet overhead, and the power companies have the authority to clear the right-of-way for the wires. It is absolute. There's no debate. Or I guess there's a little debate. But it doesn't really amount to much because we demand 100% electricity all the time. And they get what I call the butcher prune. Trees aren't meant to be pruned if they're a 60-foot tree to 20 feet. And it will try to survive, but you'll find that the pruning cuts will decay, that the limbs will grow out on them, and eventually they'll end up snapping on decayed wood. Let's see. These sites face de-icing chemicals. Some are worse than others. I know that Genesee Street, they pour the salt on the roads to keep everybody from sliding all around. Other places they push it off and they give you a little sand with a little salt, just enough salt to keep the sand from freezing.
What's the salt do to our maples? You know, we have lots of maples planted throughout the area.
On the sugar maples,
Sugar maple.
they scorch the leaves. The salts get out and dehydrate the leaves, and they turn brown on the edges. I got a picture of that. On the red maples, you can grow red maples pretty much next to the ocean. And Norway maples, you can probably grow them in the ocean. The difference is that Norway maple, which is what this is, doesn't age really well, especially when it's under power lines and gets pruned hard.
The reason I say that is a lot of people like maples, so they want to put them back in these sites, you know, and so you have to really work to educate them.
You have to talk about the fact that salt dries things out. And urban site is a site that's going to be drier than normal, and sugar maples can't take it. Sugar maples don't like this climate change we're under. They're being pushed north because we're drier in the summer, and when we do get a rain, it seems like every time it rains, it's raining 2 inches. So it's running right across hard ground, and then it's stressing the sanitary and storm systems. They can't take so much water. And again, you want your trees to be clean as possible. All trees, you know, drop little branches, leaves, some fruit, but messy is crabapple, that's slippery and dangerous. Acorns, you can slip and roll on an acorn. And if you've ever been next to a female ginkgo when they drop their fleshy berries, it just stinks. It smells like rotten meat. And we'll talk about ginkgos a little later. So what can you plant underneath the wires that will stay, in essence, under 20 feet, that will have ornamental value and be pleasant? And here's to the Terracum, or it used to be Griseum, they changed the name. But again, hardy to zone tree, 20 to 25 feet high. Bright red fruit, you know, there's samaras, the seeds, they're in the maple family. Bright red foliage in the fall, and very adaptable to different sites. They like it moist, but they can take it dry. Amalekias, there's several different varieties of Amalekia. Some of them are crosses, as is Autumn Brilliance. Again, white flower in the spring. They haven't quite opened up yet. They're about 20 feet tall. They can get about 20 feet wide, easy to prune. Bloom April, May. Blueberry, it's edible. So you're drawing a lot of birds. It's one of those full sun, partial shade trees. Grows, certainly can't outgrow a shade tree, but it can grow next to it. Good for birds, good fall color. Coosa dogwoods, one of my favorite trees. Comes from China. It's hardy, takes windy sites even. Zone 5, so it'll take cold, but it won't take a bigger cold pocket. 15 to 20 feet tall and wide. Blooms like this every year. It's like a carpet of snow over it. And then it has a red, fleshy, edible berry. I've got a picture of that later. And it goes crimson in the fall, and it even tolerates deer, so it doesn't taste very good to the deer. Purple smoke, American smoke tree. Interesting, I don't like it very much, but it is interesting. Grows underneath the power lines. Good, strong grower. You don't get it too close to the side of the road, but it can be pruned up easily. flowers May, June, full sun, a good bulb color, tolerates deer, drought, clay soils, salt, so it's bulletproof. Another one they say that's good underneath the power lines, though I think it gets a little tall, might need to be pruned on the top, but we'll take that pruning. European columnar hornbeam, all soil, sunny site, green foliage, yellow, fall, fast growing, dense grower. It is a fairly good looking tree underneath the power lines when a lot of things don't look like what you would think of a good tree, a tall tree shaped like a tree. Corkscrew hawthorns. It is the hawthorn that does not have the big thorn on it. I can remember working decades ago where one of the guys on the crew stepped on a hawthorn and went through the bottom of his shoe, through his foot, and out the top of his boot. You know, they're really dangerous. But this is thornless, so I recommend it. 20 by 20. So be sure that you don't let it get too close to the side of the road. Glossy leaves, red fruit, tolerates wet or dry sites, perfect. Salt spray, loves it. Clay, no problem. Good hardy tree. And crab apples. I have the Sergeant crab apple here because it's a low grower, 6 to 9, pretty much where you plant it. Might spread out wide a little bit, but crab apples take the pruning. A pink bud leads to a white flower, very showy, red persistent fruit into the winter until the birds find it. Usually when the birds do find it, the berries don't stay on more than a couple of days. Tolerates air pollution, direct sun, medium water, pretty good tree. And this pretty much stands for all crab apples. The crab apples come in many different shapes and sizes, from like little lollipops to, you know, very columnar. Trees that are hard to rock and hardy are the Canadian crab apples. But again, different color flowers, white, pink, red, colored leaves, green to red. Berries are persistent or not. The problem with crab apples is that they're liable to drop a fruit on the sidewalk, and that's not a good situation. So you're looking for the ones that are persistent and that the birds take care of.